Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to our video series on phonetics. In this video, we'll explore auditory phonetics, which is the study of how we hear and perceive speech sounds. We'll discuss how the human ear processes sounds, how our brain interprets speech, and why we sometimes mishear words. Ready? Let's start. So, what is auditory phonetics? Auditory phonetics studies how speech sounds are heard and processed. It focuses on what happens after a sound reaches our ears. How does our brain recognize speech? And why do accents sound different? And why do some people struggle with certain sounds? Understanding auditory phonetics helps answer these questions. It involves the ear, brain, and cognitive processing, and helps explain language learning, speech disorders, and accents. Okay, how the human ear and now let's go to human ear and speech perception. Our ability to hear speech starts with the outer ear, which collects sound waves and send them to the middle ear, and here tiny bones amplify the vibrations before passing them to the inner ear, where they are converted into electrical signals. And finally, our brain processes these signals into recognizable words and meanings. That's how we understand speech. Remarkable, isn't it? And how the brain recognizes speech sounds. Our brain doesn't just hear sounds, it interprets them. For example, we can easily tell the difference between p and b because our brain categorizes sounds based on small acoustic differences. Sometimes, it even fills in missing sound based on context. A famous example is the McGurk effect, where what we see influences what we hear, or we can say visual and auditory information interact. If someone mouths ga, but the sound played is ba, say for example, I said ga, but the sound plate is ba, many people actually perceive da instead. Try it out sometime. It's fascinating. Now let's go to phonemic distinctions. What we hear versus what we don't. Different languages perceive sounds differently. For example, English speakers easily distinguish R and al, but in Japanese, for example, these sounds are often heard as the same sound. Similarly, in Spanish, b and v are pronounced almost identically, making it tricky for Spanish speakers learning English to hear the difference. This shows how our language background shapes how we process sounds. Okay, now what speech perception in how about speech perception in noisy environments? Have you ever had a conversation in a very noisy room but still understood your friend? I'm sure you do. That's thanks to cocktail party effect, which is our brain's ability to focus on one speaker while tuning out background noise. However, sometimes this fails and we mishear words. That's why we sometimes get lyrics wrong in songs. Have you ever misheard a lyric that sounded funny? It's your brain trying to make sense of unclear speech. So, why do accents sometimes make speech harder to understand? Well, it's because different languages use different phonemes and stress patterns. If your brain isn't used to hearing certain sounds, it takes longer to process them. The good news, the more exposure you get, the better your brain adapts. That's why listening practice is key when learning a new language. Remember, listening practice is key when learning a new language. To sum up, auditory phonetics is about how we hear and understand speech. Our ear and brain work together to make sense of sounds. But our language background can influence what we perceived. And as we've seen, our brain sometimes fills in gaps or even misinterprets sounds based on context. That's a wrap on auditory phonetics. Now you know how our brain processes speech and why we sometimes hear things differently. In our next video, we'll look at real-world applications of phonetics. That is, how it helps in language learning, AI, and even forensic science. See you soon. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.